Well, hello, beautiful community. For contingent health reasons, we're going to have a brief chat from bed today about Putin's messaging about the war to Russians and about our Western illusions about stopping the war. At the turn of the year, and we're going to go through a thread I've written for us, and I really think it will be a brief way of re-anchoring two or three things we repeatedly talk about in a way that's helpful. At the turn of the year, Putin's message to Russians is, number one, we are in a forever war with the West and our survival is at stake. Two, there is no war. Get on with your lives, please, Russians. Now, the first part of Putin's message is what we used to call, and still call, alternate reality propaganda. That's propaganda that's continuous with the fare that was served up during the Soviet period. That's to say, propaganda that presents a false picture of reality and tries to persuade you that it's true. The second part, there's no war, get on with your lives, is post-truth propaganda. So that's, and we discussed this in the propaganda video on the main channel, a story about saturating the information environment so as to cast doubt on whether anything at all about anything is true. In my interpretation, Putin's avoidance of a ubiquitous forever war message, the fact that his forever war message is interchangeable with a there is no war message. Putin's avoidance of ubiquitous forever war messaging is a technique to help him move toward a forever war. The contradictions of his messaging shouldn't be taken by us as indicating a lack of conviction. In other words, he feels that you ain't gonna get away with a kind of level of politicization that he'd need from Russian citizens to get away with a forever war message that isn't supplemented, brackets, contradicted, by a there is no war message. That needs to change or needs to be changed, but you can't just go on as though that's already changed or that's already been changed. The population isn't ready for a forever war message, period. So the contradictions of his messaging shouldn't be taken by us as lack of conviction. The illusion in the West is that Putin will stop under the right circumstances. It's very difficult, genuinely difficult for policymakers today because given the cul-de-sac that we are in, wishful thinking naturally takes you to the thought that, well, this is going to stop at some point, because surely most things stop, you know. We just need to wait until these circumstances arise, is the thought. But in reality, for Putin, any stopping point will be a stopping point on the way to a bigger conflict with the West. Stopping points are part of the war for Putin, on my interpretation of not just the intent of the Kremlin, but what are the inevitable consequences of the Kremlin's conception of change on the global scene that it inevitably and necessarily needs to induce, and even more importantly than that, perhaps regime security. Russia experts, this is going to be a mild zing, that's actually not a zing, because it's simply a matter of people's expertise lying in different areas. Russia experts frequently point out that Putin won't stop and that ignoring this will set us up for a big security crisis ahead. Yet the form this suggestion takes, implying that the problem is a lack of understanding and a lack of willpower, is itself problematic. And you may guess what's coming now. The main obstacle to Western support for Ukraine is democratic incapacity, not lack of willpower, and not inability to think clearly about what the Putin regime is up to. One of the challenges of our age is that tying action to a clear vision of a global order might be more than democracies whose institutions are in crisis can do. Does that mean we give up? No. If you are swimming off a beach and you're being taken out by a rip, do you give up? No. You strategically try to come out as best as you can out of the situation. In the case of a rip, it might be not fighting it too much, but that's a terrible analogy. But let's stick with it. Because what we're trying to say is you can always do better, right? The choice isn't between returning to the beach exactly where you left it and drowning. The choice is returning to the beach at a different point, or hitting the shore elsewhere and returning to another beach, and so on. In politics, even when there's a big current against you that ain't gonna go away, you can always do 1% better, and 1% better than that 1%, and 1% better than that 1%. So the idea of sort of simple resignation because circumstances are against you or something feels structurally difficult to achieve, like a coherent strategy for a global order, well, that simply doesn't mean that you give up, because you can always do incrementally better and then incrementally better than that. So the idea of giving up has to go with the idea that you can't make progress. And the idea that you can't make progress is not just wrong, but it's necessarily wrong. It's simply incompatible with human action as we understand it. So we can always make some kind of difference, and we can then always explore exactly how much difference we can make, even if circumstances are against us. Let's Love Talk very soon.